The last time I reached for a book without thinking about it was February, I believe, February of 2024. I know because I had just finished cataloguing the Whitmore collection, 43 letters, 1811 through 1819, ink on rag paper, and I went to pull Gaskell's A New Introduction to Bibliography from the third shelf on the left. My arm went up, and then there was a sound inside my skull that I can only describe as a moth made of electricity. A small, precise, terrible shock, and my hand stopped in mid-air. I stood there for what felt like a long time, my arm still raised, the book 2 inches away from my fingers. I am 72 years old. I spent 41 years as a librarian and curator for the Rhode Island Historical Society. I have a card catalogue inside my head, had perhaps, that held the location, date, condition, and provenance of thousands of documents. I could tell you that manuscript provenance number 1847 was written in March of 1743 by a Newport merchant named Ezekiel Crane, and that it references 3 sugar shipments from the Antilles in the 4th paragraph of the 2nd folio, without consulting a single index. I can't tell you right now if I took the 10 a.m. Tramadol, or if I was only planning to. I have 14 pills left in the bottle on the nightstand. 14. I know because I counted them this morning before I did anything else, before I put on my glasses, before I went to the bathroom. I lined them up on the surface of the nightstand, small, oblong, white, and counted to 14. Then I put them back. The windows are covered with brown packing paper. I taped it up in March of 2025, when I discovered that direct sunlight made the shocks worse. Something about the brightness triggering the moth. So now I live with the light the paper lets through, which is the color of old documents, which is, if I'm being precise, the color of a page that has been read too many times. It's not the worst light I've ever worked in, if I remember correctly. I want to explain something that I suspect most people don't know about Tramadol. Most people have heard of OxyContin or fentanyl, or the drugs they put in the news, with photographs of suburban kitchens and grief-stricken parents. Tramadol is not those drugs. Tramadol is described in the pharmacological literature as a centrally acting analgesic. It binds to opioid receptors, but it also inhibits the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine, which is what antidepressants do. It is, in the truest clinical sense, 2 drugs in one, a partial opioid, an SNRI. And because it sits in that particular grey area, neither fully one category nor the other, it is prescribed as though it was something minor, something unremarkable. My rheumatologist, Dr. Carlos Reyes, he was 48 years old when he first wrote the prescription, a careful man, spoke with a slight accent I could never quite place, kept an orchid on his desk, told me in January of 2022 that he was increasing the dose from 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams, twice daily. He said, and I am going to quote this precisely because I have catalogued it in the part of my memory that has not yet burned. He said, "It will help you stay active, Martha. It's quite safe at this dosage." 12-minute consultation. I remember checking my watch when I left the building. 12 minutes, 30 seconds. I have a habit of noting time. The back pain began, if I'm being honest with myself, sometime around 1997. 30 years of lifting. Folios bound in leather from the 1700s, some of them weighing 4 kilograms. Manuscript boxes of 1/4-inch archival board. Oversized volumes that required a second person to move safely, and there was not always a second person. The human spine is not designed for decades of that particular physical grammar. The forward lean, the held breath, the weight transferred incorrectly because you are trying to protect the object, not yourself. By 2019, I had what the imaging described as moderate degenerative changes at L3, L4, with mild foraminal narrowing. My primary care physician, Dr. Philip Ames, I'd had him for 14 years by then, a calm man, 60 years old, practiced out of a small office in Providence that always smelled faintly of coffee, referred me to Dr. Reyes after a particularly difficult episode in September of that year. I had dropped an archival box, just let it fall, because holding it was no longer possible. Dr. Reyes started me at Tramadol 50 milligrams, only for bad days, he said, as needed. The refill was automatic. I want you to understand how it begins. Because I have thought about this carefully, the way I think about provenance, tracing something backward to its original context. You take 50 milligrams on a bad day. The back settles. You sleep. You go back to work the next morning, and you can carry the box that the day before you could not carry. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no euphoria, no altered consciousness, no moment of revelation. It simply removes a thing that was in the way. And then the bad days start happening more often. Or perhaps the bar for what constitutes a bad day lowers incrementally. I cannot say with certainty which it was. What I can say is that by 2021 I was taking 50 milligrams most days, and by the time Dr. Reyes wrote the new prescription in January of 2022, I had stopped thinking of it as a medication for bad days. I thought of it as a medication for days. It will help you stay active, Martha. It's quite safe at this dosage. The CVS pharmacy on Thames Street in Bristol knew my name. I did not think about that until much later. The pharmacist, young man, perhaps 26, always wore a blue vest, would see me come in and begin processing the refill before I reached the counter. That should have been a question. I made it into a comfort. There is a particular type of moth, Tiniola bicelliella, the common clothes moth, whose larva destroys textiles and paper by consuming the protein keratin in the substrate. A single larva can destroy the structural integrity of a document you can still see and hold and carry. It looks intact from the outside. The fibers are gone. I have thought about this more than I should. What I have in my skull, what appeared for the first time in March of 2025, when the CVS pharmacist told me there was a national supply chain disruption and they would not have my Tramadol for 72 hours, is not a common moth. It is an electric moth. It does not eat the books. It eats the index cards. I need to tell you about the index cards because I am not sure I can make you understand what losing them means unless I explain what they were. My interior card catalogue was not metaphorical. It was functional. It worked the same way a physical card catalogue works, cross-referenced, systematically organized, accessible by multiple entry points. I could retrieve a document by date, by author, by collection, by material composition, by physical condition at time of acquisition. I had trained myself to do this over 4 decades. It was not a gift I was born with, it was a practice I had developed, the way a musician develops muscle memory. In March of 2025, on the second day without Tramadol, I was sitting at my desk trying to write up a short description of a letter I had authenticated the previous week, a 1789 letter from a Providence merchant to his factor in London, standard commercial correspondence, nothing particularly unusual, and I could not remember the date, not approximately, not within a decade. I had read that letter 17 times, I had held it, I had noted the watermark, the chain lines, the ink oxidation consistent with iron gall on laid paper. Gone. Not the letter, the index card for the letter. The electric moth had eaten the card. It started with 72 hours, or rather, the 72 hours were when I learned it had already started. That's the thing about this particular kind of damage. You don't notice it accumulating. The index cards thin slowly. A date here, a name there. The sequence of events in a memory goes slightly wrong. You remember the meeting before the argument, but the argument happened first, and the ordering matters because it changes what the memory means. I called Dr. Ames on the second day. I was, I will admit, not entirely composed. I described what was happening, the shocks, the disorientation, the inability to access information I knew was there. He listened. He said, "Martha, you're nervous. This is part of getting older." I want to be precise about my reaction to this statement. I did not cry. I do not cry easily. It is a quality the work cultivated in me, 41 years of handling other people's grief in document form. I said, "Dr. Ames, I am describing neurological symptoms." He said he would have a refill called in as soon as the supply was available. The refill came on the 3rd day. I took 100 milligrams within 10 minutes of receiving the bottle. The electric moth went quiet, and I did not think carefully enough about what that meant. My colleague Janet Morley, 67 years old, had been at the Historical Society since 1991, knew more about 19th century Rhode Island textile manufacturing than anyone alive, said to me at a consultancy meeting in October of 2024, "Martha, you look remarkably well for someone your age." I had been awake since 2:37 a.m. I had counted 8 pills remaining in the bottle before leaving the apartment. I had calculated, during the 7-minute drive to Providence, whether that was enough to last until Friday. I had also realized, somewhere en route 44, that I could not remember the name of the manuscript I was supposed to present at the meeting. I knew the collection. I knew the physical characteristics of every document in it. I could not find the name. "Thank you, Janet," I said. I found the name 3 minutes before the meeting started. It came from somewhere further back in the system, a backup catalogue that runs slower. I presented without error. I went home and counted the pills again. The losses, when I catalogue them, which I do, because cataloguing is what I know, follow a sequence that I recognize from what happens to an institutional archive in institutional decline. Not sudden catastrophe, gradual deaccessioning, each item removed for a reason that seems, in isolation, minor. First, sleep. I began waking at specific, consistent times, 2:37 a.m. most nights, occasionally 3:14 a.m. and the silence in the apartment was the kind of silence that has texture, not peaceful, dense, the sound of a room that has not had a conversation in it for a long time. Second, reading. I tried to read chapter 3 of a monograph on 19th century bookbinding, a book I had read twice before, owned since 1998, and arrived at the bottom of the page without having retained a single sentence. I reread the page, again, 7 times I counted. On the 8th reading, I retained the first paragraph. This is what I mean about the index cards. The reading was happening, but the filing was not. Third, the error. In February of 2025, I was consulting on a manuscript authentication for the Society, a short document purportedly from 1743, commercial in nature, provenance uncertain. I dated it to 1783. My colleague, a younger archivist named Thomas Hewitt, 29 years old, said gently that the watermark indicated pre-1750 manufacture. He showed me the chain line spacing. He was correct. I had erred by 40 years. I have never, in 41 years, made a dating error of more than 5 years. I drove home and sat in the parking garage for 22 minutes before I could go inside. What I want to say about the Tramadol, and I want to say it clearly in whatever precision I have left, is that the drug is not described honestly. It is described as a mild option, a first-line analgesic, something for the bad days. What is not described with the same clarity is that it creates in the renal and hepatic systems of a woman of 72 a metabolic burden that differs significantly from what it creates in a 40-year-old. What is not described is that the serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibition means that stopping it is not simply a matter of the opioid receptor returning to baseline. You are withdrawing from 2 systems simultaneously. What is not described is the brain zap, the electric moth, which does not appear in the patient-facing literature at all, or appears only as discontinuation symptoms in a subordinate clause. I spent 41 years making information accessible. I understand what it means to bury something in a subordinate clause. I have one object from my working life that I keep on the desk near the window with the paper over it, so the light is document-colored. It is a catalogue card I wrote myself, handwriting on unlined cardstock, pencil, with the cataloguing date in the upper right corner. The handwriting is very clear, even, deliberate, slightly italic. The hand of someone who trusted her ability to put the right word in the right place. I look at that card and I know, factually, that I wrote it. I have no memory of writing it. It is, in a very precise sense, a document from another collection, one I no longer have access to. The 14 pills are an arithmetic problem I work on continuously, the way I once worked on a difficult provenance question. I will take 2 per day, which is the prescribed dose. 2 per day means 7 days. The refill authorization comes in 9 days. That is a gap of 2 days. I could take 1.5 per day, split a tablet, but splitting an extended release formulation disrupts the coating and alters the absorption profile in ways that introduce variables I cannot control. I could call Dr. Ames and explain the arithmetic. The last time I explained something to Dr. Ames, he told me I was nervous. I have decided to take 2 per day and see what happens at day 7. This is not a plan. This is the arithmetic of someone who has lost access to the part of themselves that made plans. What I miss most is not the absence of pain, though the pain is real, has always been real. The L3, L4 does not care whether I am managing it adequately or not. What I miss is the interior space, the library that existed behind my eyes. When I was working, I could close my eyes and walk through it, not metaphorically, but as a navigational act, row by row, collection by collection. I knew where everything was. I closed my eyes this morning and tried to walk through it. The Electric Moth was waiting at the entrance. I reached for a memory. The first time I held an illuminated manuscript, 1987, cotton gloves, the vellum so thin it was nearly translucent, the gold leaf still catching light after 500 years, and the moth bit, and the memory went dark at the edges, and I could not hold it. I put the memory down, carefully. A retired librarian is not a category that attracts much attention. I was not a surgeon. I did not have a family who watched me deteriorate in real time. I have no family to speak of, which is a different kind of loss that I have long since filed in a section of the archive that I no longer visit. I had my work, and then I had a version of my work in retirement, the consultancy, the authentication, the occasional article for the Journal of the Early American Historical Manuscript Society. I had the interior library. Nobody looks at a 72-year-old woman in a cardigan and thinks she is in withdrawal. They think she is nervous. They think it is part of getting older. Dr. Ames thought so. Janet Morley, when I told her in January that I was having some difficulty with a medication, nodded with a sympathy that I recognized as the sympathy people extend to the elderly when they suspect cognitive decline. She suggested a nice cup of tea. Tramadol is not a cup of tea. The packing paper on the windows has been there for a year now. I keep meaning to take it down. On overcast days, I think perhaps today is the day. The light won't be strong enough to trigger the shocks. But overcast days have their own quality of despair, and I find I am conserving my decisions for things that matter more. The 14 pills, the 9 days, the arithmetic. The clock in the hallway marks the half hours. I have been aware of it since March of 2025, in a way I was not before. It is the only sound in the apartment that has regularity, that indicates time is passing in an organized fashion. Before March of 2025, the sound of a clock was simply the sound of a room being inhabited. Now it is something I count. I count everything now. It's the only system still functioning. There is a manuscript I thought of this morning, one I authenticated in 2003, a letter written by a Providence woman in 1798 describing her household accounts for the month of November. The letter is extraordinary only in its specificity. She notes the cost of every purchase, the weather on each market day, the condition of the roads. Nothing of historical importance in the conventional sense. But she wrote it as if the recording itself mattered, as if the act of putting the numbers in order was a form of preservation. I have been doing the same thing since March of 2025, recording, counting, noting the time I wake up, the number of pills, the hours until the next refill. If someone were to read my notes, they would find them unremarkable. Numbers, dates, the arithmetic of a woman trying to stay organized. But I know what I am actually recording. I am recording the shape of what I am losing. 14 pills. I am going to count them one more time before I try to sleep. Not because the number will have changed, because the counting is what remains when everything else has been disrupted. The index cards, the dates, the sequence of things, these are unreliable now. But 14 is 14, the number holds. My arm is raised toward the bookshelf again, the same gesture as before, the Gaskell, third shelf on the left, its spine blue with white lettering that I have read so many times I can trace it from memory, if I remember correctly. I'm not reaching for the book exactly, I'm reaching for the weight of it, for the smell of it, paper and time, and something else I have never been able to name precisely, which is the smell of information that has survived. I stop just short of it, because the moth is there, somewhere between my hand and the spine of the book, and I have learned not to